adding a little bit of comedy to your YouTube videos is a great way to keep people engaged. However, if you break some key basic principles, you can quickly find yourself losing the attention of the audience, which causes dip in retention. So I'm going to share with you 12 basic principles related to comedy on YouTube. Principle 1. Content affiliation. When we do an analysis of comedy on YouTube, we often find that jokes that relate to the content do better than jokes that don't relate to the content. So let's say you and your friends are doing a little challenge, whoever gets first to the store wins. In this case, if we start making jokes about some random clothing or something that we experienced in our day, those jokes are not really related to what is happening, and therefore those jokes are actually worse for retention. On the other hand, if we start making jokes about how slow somebody walks, or maybe he walks a little funny, at that point we're making jokes that are related to the content on hand. And those jokes have shown to perform better than jokes that don't relate to the content. Principle number 2, prior knowledge. For this principle, we're pretty much going to think about what does the viewer already know. So for example, if we are going to make a joke about an event in real life that we didn't establish in our video, then it requires them to have prior knowledge about this event. The same happens if we uploaded a video in the past, that becomes prior knowledge. So any joke that focuses on that now requires prior knowledge in our audience. So if a new viewer who doesn't have this prior knowledge suddenly watches our video, they won't really get the joke, and they'll often feel a disconnect, which leads to a dip in retention. So if you want to adhere to this principle, it is actually pretty easy. Just make sure that at some point in your video prior to the joke, you made a clear reference to this event. That way the viewer knows about this, and now the joke has a higher chance to work. Principle number 3, variety. Now before I get into this one, because this is a big one, I'm going to quickly state, all of these principles are subject to your own preference. I mean, these have an impact on retention, but if you break 1 or 2 principles once in a while, it's not going to do that much damage. In the end, these principles are for optimization. Doesn't mean you can never break them. So for our third principle, variety is essential because it keeps people interested. You see, we as humans, we don't really like predictability. We like surprise. We like uncertainty. And especially when we're watching a YouTube video, we don't really want to feel like we know what's coming next. And with comedy, this is especially true. So let's say one of your first jokes about the 1 minute mark in your video is a way to misspell a word or something like that. Well, at that point, we try to not have this type of comedy happen again within this video. Else this becomes repetitive and boring and predictable. We're looking for variety in the delivery of comedy. And here's a few more examples on what we can do other than saying a word wrong. We can have a funny sound. We can remove the sound and just have some dead silence. We could also show a funny image, or if this image is moving, this becomes maybe a meme. We can have a little back and forth between you and a friend, and so much more. As you can see, there's already countless of ways that you can add variety. And by adding variety, you keep your video fresh, and this helps retention. Principle number 4, timelessness. Now, even though I just said that you could use some memes, memes is the perfect example of something that is often not timeless. As you're watching this video, I assume you might have heard of the Damn Daniel meme. It was funny at some point for about 2 days, but then afterwards it kinda got overused.
If you haven't been hearing the words Damn Daniel in the last 24 hours, you've not been on the internet.
And now it's out of style, and now if you bring it up, nobody would really laugh anymore. Those are not timeless memes, and often we want to make our videos timeless. This helps us get views in the future and still stay funny. Because imagine, maybe that video will do good with those jokes right now, but in 3 years somebody watches this and suddenly you look like a fool. On the other hand, certain sound effects such as the Wilhelm scream, an editor feel free to play it a few times, are extremely timeless. So these are great to use. Now, one heads up, don't use cricket sounds or or any of those kind of things. Those are also overused, which, you know, while they're timeless, they're used so often that they kind of lost their comedic value. My joke is so bad. Principle number 5, simplicity. Now this might become a little bit more of a controversial point, but if we look at a population, we see that not everybody is intellectually as capable as the other person. What I mean with this is that some people are able to grasp complex concepts and other people aren't able to grasp these complex concepts. In jokes, this also matters. If we make a joke that requires somebody to have 140 plus IQ, then yeah, you're probably going to miss out on a lot of people. Because anybody under the 140 IQ range at that point is probably not going to get it, and it causes, again, a disconnect. On the other hand, if we cater our jokes so that somebody in the lower intelligence range, such as 80 IQ, can understand and easily grasp our jokes, well, guess what? Everybody will now understand it, except for, again, people lower than 80 IQ, but that becomes a minority. Now, I'm not saying that you cannot have a joke catered to a more intelligent audience, but at that point you are limiting your audience. So if you break this principle, make sure to understand that. Principle 6, wide appeal. This one kind of ties into what I just touched on, where we simply try to figure out what are the groupings that we can put the population under. And then we try to see how do we appeal to the most amount of people. If there's any principle you can break, and I'm not going to hate you over it, this is the principle though. Because not everybody's trying to appeal to everybody. But if you are trying to appeal to a wider audience, we often have to think about many things, such as the age of our audience. If you're going to make a joke that worked in the 90s, I will get it. But somebody who is like 12 years old or 14 years old, they're just not going to get it, so you're suddenly aging your content, and that makes your appeal a little bit smaller. This becomes a particular problem in educational content, where you often want to appeal to as many people who are interested in this topic. And there's one type of joke that is particularly bad when it comes down to wide appeal, and these are aggressive jokes. For example, one person punching another person could be funny for a large male audience. However, we often see that the female audience reacts very adverse to this type of joke. So if you want to appeal to both groups, you may want to consider not doing those type of jokes. But let's say your audience is 95% male, then maybe that joke can work. Principle 7, vocabulary. Now this could easily be put under the wide appeal, but we have to think in native and non-native English speakers. If you look at your geography, you will often find that most people are not from an English-speaking country. And if we look at studies, we can find that non-native English speakers have about 10 to 20,000 words less in their vocabulary range. So if you use words that are easy to grasp for English-speaking people, such as a word called antsy, the foreigners, such as myself, may have no idea what you just talked about. And when we don't understand something, it's very difficult to see the comedy in it. This brings me to principle number 8, grossness. A few years back, in an interview with Graham Stephan, I talked about pee jokes and how bad pee jokes are for retention.
Apparently, if you make a pee joke, it will drop your retention by around 5%.
No pee jokes, that's just a no-go, no matter how funny it is. I mean, I think it's funny, but doesn't matter. It's just a no-go. Like, you can't do that. It's just no.
But in reality, pee jokes aren't the only thing that are bad. It is any type of gross element that often is really bad for retention. Because, look, a lot of people are eating while watching videos. The last thing you want to hear about is pee, poo, puke, or any of those kind of things. Because at that point, you're literally just taking the piss out of your audience. Don't leak that joke. Now, under grossness, we often include sexual jokes because these jokes also have an impact on the audience a lot of times. Principle number 9, inside jokes. Sometimes while you're recording, you're having so much fun with friends that you kind of create this inside joke. And this inside joke happens within one video. However, often this carries to other videos. And at that point, we have to think is that prior knowledge rule again, where this new audience that you're touching might not be familiar with the inside joke. And you are laughing and having such a fun time talking about a hubba lubba doob doo or whatever it is. And the new audience is just confused and they're thinking, what is this? And maybe eventually it'll catch on, but initially there's this confusion. This makes a lot of people tune out. So next time when you make a hubba lubba doob doob joke, that's for that video and that's it. The feeling that people often get with these jokes is something what we call the third wheel effect, which is, you see two people laughing and you're kind of sitting there in awkwardness. It's not something we like. Principle 10. Abstractness. This is another principle that can easily be broken. However, I encourage you to follow this one because this is better for retention. And that's the idea that when we say a joke, we want to be able to visualize the joke. So this could be either by having supporting visuals such as an animation. So don't just talk about tripping over a tree and falling with your face in the mud. Instead, show you tripping and then falling in the mud. Visualization is great for retention, and that's the reason why this principle came alive. Principle 11, repetition. Now, repetition is a great thing in educational content if you want people to remember stuff. However, in comedic bits, repetition can often lead to boredom. So let's say you yell out a word loud, like, "Hey, you silly!" That could be funny the first time, but if you do it again, "Hey, you silly!" and again, "Hey, you silly!" and again, "Hey, you silly!" you'll notice that over time it becomes boring. However, this principle does come with an exception. Certain comedic bits don't work unless they become repetitive. And in those cases, this principle should not be followed. And last but not least, principle 12, pacing. At the end of the day, the most important thing in videos to maintain retention is to keep a good pacing of progression. Pacing is in the speed in which information gets delivered, and progression is the steps that we take towards our goal. This is where comedy often sets us back a little. When we take the time to make a joke, we are stalling our journey. Now that's not necessarily a bad thing, but if we stall for a long time, let's say we keep making jokes for about 10 to 20 seconds, well, at that point, we're slowing down the story so much that it becomes disruptive. For this reason, quick and easy jokes are often best for retention. And those are 12 principles that we should try to follow most of the time. I'm saying most of the time because in the end, your channel is your vision. And if breaking all these principles are exactly what you want to do and that's how you grow your channel, then you should be breaking them. These are principles, they're not hard set rules. So if they don't match your vision, go ahead and break them, but do realize that they can hurt retention or wide appeal. Now that's it. If you want more, make sure to subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.